Welcome to this edition of the 700 Club. Federal agents armed with a warrant broke into the home of Paul Manafort in the early morning hours to raid him and search documents. This is a man who's a distinguished leader in the Republican Party, advisor to presidents. And you say, what in the world is going on? Well, Mueller has loaded up his team with some of the best gunslingers in the legal profession. And Trump has got 2 or 3 guys, headed among others by our dear friend Jay Sekulow. And somebody commented, it's like going to a knife fight armed with a stick of butter, because Mueller has really got the guns. And you ask, what is he going after? Why are they having a raid on Paul Manafort's home? I mean, the man was perfectly willing to give them all they asked for. He wasn't holding anything back. And yet they want to carry out a search warrant at 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Do you feel like when a special counsel is appointed like that and actions like that are taken, it's almost as though something has to be found? Do you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. You know, as they say, if all you've got's a hammer, everything's a nail, and you've just got to hit something somewhere. And if they can't find a scalp to put on the wall, then they failed. And this kind of stuff is awful. This fishing expedition, they start out after one thing. They're talking about a probe of Russian involvement in our election. We've been searching that for well over a year and have found virtually nothing. But now they've got this high-powered team. As I said earlier, I have been head of several organizations, and if I had a vice president in one of those organizations who hired an avowed enemy of mine and put him in a position where there wouldn't be any possibility of getting rid of him, I mean, what kind of action would I take, and what would you take in business? And yet the Deputy Attorney General appointed a counsel without asking for the president's permission or his boss, the Attorney General. And this guy has apparently given far-reaching power. But where did it come from? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the Justice Department permits this sort of thing. And it's supposed to be highly contained. It's supposed to be limited to one type of inquiry, and there needs to be a crime. But now he's empowering grand juries and having search warrants of distinguished Republicans' homes. I mean, this is outrageous. But that's the life we live in. Well, so far, it's just a war of words, but the world is hoping the growing tensions between North Korea and the United States and other countries won't turn into an actual shooting war. And so far, Kim Jong-un isn't backing down.
The North Koreans said they're working on a plan to launch intermediate missiles into the waters around the United States territory of Guam, even as they lashed out at President Trump. Mark Martin has that story.
North Korea responded to President Donald Trump's strong warnings by labeling them, quote, a load of nonsense.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
The Korean Army said sound dialogue is not possible with such a guy bereft of reason, and only absolute force can work on him. The rogue regime has doubled down on its threat against Guam, warning it could send 4 medium to long-range ballistic missiles over Japan and into waters around the small island by the middle of this month. Guam is home to 7,000 U.S. military men and women and has a population of 160,000. Japan and South Korea said they would react strongly if Pyongyang carried out the plan. U.S. allies like Australia condemned North Korea's aggression.
Our collective strategy has not changed, and that is to bring pressure to bear on North Korea through diplomatic and economic means to force it to change its behavior.
And Defense Secretary James Mattis also had a strong warning for North Korea, saying it should cease any consideration of actions that would lead to the end of its regime and the destruction of its people. Deputy Assistant to President Trump Sebastian Gorka said on the CBN News program Faith Nation on Facebook Live that it's up to North Korea now to de-escalate the tension.
Right now, when it comes to what North Korea has been doing in flagrant breach of all international requirements upon it when it comes to nuclear weapons testing, or ballistic missiles testing. The ball is in Pyongyang's court. Secretary Tillerson at the ASEAN meeting 2 days ago said, if they stop their ballistic missile testing, we will know we have an act of good faith. So right now, the message is clear. This president would take whatever measures necessary to protect this nation. It is now up to North Korea to de-escalate.
The United States and its allies have laid out their positions, and the world is watching to see what North Korea's next moves will be. Mark Martin, CBN News.
Thanks, Mark. You know, I was thinking about this whole deal up there. They say they've got over 1 million men under arms, big army, but they have virtually no air force. And we have overwhelming power in the air. So with our fighter planes and supersonic bombers, we could decimate any kind of ground army and do it very, very quickly. You've got all these mass formations of Korean soldiers, and you could just literally wipe them out and kill them. And yes, they can threaten Seoul. They've got artillery batteries, but I think if we had targeted Tomahawk missiles out of naval ships off the coast, we could very well take out most of their artillery. But anyhow, it could be a bloody mess, and we don't want a war. Nobody wants a war. But this is what happens, folks. I was in Korea. I was in North Korea, stationed there during the Korean War. So I know what I am talking about somewhat. And I remember Douglas MacArthur, who was a brilliant general. He said, we've got to go to the Yalu River and seal off this peninsula and then enforce our will upon them. And had we done that, the Russians would not have been able to take a lieutenant colonel and put him in charge of the country. That's what the first Kim was. He was a lieutenant colonel in the, well, I guess the Korean Army. And he was installed by the Russians. But we allowed that to happen because Harry Truman said, well, let's not engage in war. We might have a war with the Russians or a war with the Chinese. And so let's not go to the Yalu. Let's stop where you are at the 38th parallel and let North Korea flourish. Well, we've paid the price for it. That's what happens when civilians intervene and where this peace initiative comes from. If we had been strong at the time, if we had gone forward boldly and sealed off the Korean peninsula, we wouldn't have this trouble today. But we've got a huge problem now. I mean, when you've got a crazy man armed with nuclear weapons who might well be able to hit Denver, San Francisco, Los Angeles, or maybe even Washington, D.C., it's very serious. Well, with us now, from Washington, is our CBN News national correspondent, Eric Rosales. And Eric, what are you hearing from the Pentagon, from the top brass about this whole threat?
Well, you know, Pat, the last thing that anyone Pentagon official wants to do is go to war. But they did say, I did get off the phone just a few minutes ago with PACOM, and they told me that they are very confident and ready to carry out any mission that the President of the United States wants them to carry out. You know, I did also find out from several sources of mine at the Pentagon that if a strategic attack would actually take place, a preemptive strike, it would involve B-1B bombers that would take off from Guam. We've seen B-1B bombers practicing with the Japanese, along with even flying over into the Chinese airspace and things like that. They've been practicing right there in the Pacific region just to make sure that something like this, that they are ready and confident to carry out.
Well, you know, the Washington Post broke the story that the Koreans had been able to miniaturize nuclear bombs, put them on the head of a missile. What have you learned about further about their progress in that?
Well, I tell you what, Pat, this is a major threshold. That's what people have to realize, that this is a major threshold in order to become a full-fledged nuclear power. Now, we're hearing that through intelligence reports that North Korea has up to about 60 of these nuclear missiles, and it's still unclear if they've been able to master the re-entry of these vehicles into the atmosphere to be able to bring them down and strategically bring them down in specific areas. So that is still unclear, but I tell you what, they've been working on this technology since the 1990s, so they've had a lot of time. Like we said, a number of people have said, experts have said, that this was something that we should have taken care of 20 to 25 years ago when they were just starting this nuclear program.
What about a hydrogen bomb? Do they have that too? Do you think you say about 60 of the others? Are there any of them hydrogen?
Yes, they are, sir. Yes, we have heard that they are working on a hydrogen bomb, which would, which of course, the impact of this, if a hydrogen bomb actually hit, let's take New York City, the death toll would be about 3.4 million people. So this is an enormous amount of power. Again, we don't know as of yet. Intelligence reports are actually stating, and sources of mine just don't know yet if they've been able to strategically work on the re-entry of these vehicles through the atmosphere and be able to hit a specific target. You know, whether or not they just actually set off this hydrogen bomb and drop it, that would be another issue. But of course, our THAAD system would in fact take care of most of these. And the biggest thing is that we just don't actually know exactly where all the missiles are in North Korea. You know, intelligence reports actually state that they have strategic areas where they would target if the B-1B bombers would actually come over and strike. But at the same time, all they need is just one or two to get through the THAAD system and make its way to the U.S. mainland.
Lindsey Graham, Senator, was quoted as saying he didn't think the president's bluffing. Is that the word you got, that he's deadly serious about taking action?
Yes, sir. Actually, what happened was Lindsey Graham and the president did have a meeting, a private meeting, and Lindsey Graham did share that during that private meeting, the president gave him two options that we would actually strike North Korea, one of which being that if they actually did hit Guam or any of our U.S. allies, the second, if they continue to develop an ICBM missile. And as we heard from the Minister of Defense, who was just in the Philippines in Manila, he actually said that for North Korea actually said that making the bombs and making ICBMs is off the table. In other words, that is something that they will not negotiate. So that is exactly what Lindsey Graham said, that the president is in fact very serious about taking care of this issue right now.
Last question, Eric. You know, you have an option, you know, 50-50, 60-40, 20-30, so forth. What are the odds from the people you're talking to that there actually might be a war?
I'm hearing everything from 50-50 to 60-40 that there will be a war as of right now. We're hearing that, you know, that this is like a kid with a can. You know, this issue has just been kicked along after administration after administration, and it's now up to President Donald Trump to take care of this issue. And as he said before, he is willing and able to do so.
Eric, God bless you. Just keep it up, buddy.
God bless
Thank
you too, Pat.
I tell you, that is frightening. You know, I was there, but I was there, you know, when initially the North came running into the South. The aggression came from the North. It didn't come from the South. And the Allied forces, the American forces, were woefully unprepared. And they were pushed all the way into a little perimeter around what was then called Pusan. I don't know what they got different names for it now, but it was Pusan then. A little perimeter. And Harry Truman got a resolution from the United Nations to act against it. And we began to put troops in there and began to break out of that perimeter. And finally, there was that brilliant end run that MacArthur made to land at Incheon, a very dangerous landing, and then move on into the north. And so it was a breakthrough that was so important. But it looked as if at that time the North, which it was the aggressor, was going to win the battle and take over South Korea. And only our intervention kept them from being you know, overwhelmed. So here we are again. And the South is very prosperous, have got huge enterprises, big corporations, the cabals as they call them, big corporations, and lots of money. And they want some help, and we want to help them, and we've got troops over there, but they're all vulnerable. It's going to be a horrible mess if we go to war over there. Well, in other news, an offer from Hungary to help a Christian in need. John Jessup has that.
That is right, Pat. The government of Hungary has offered asylum to an Iranian Christian actress facing deportation from Sweden to Iran. Ideen Stranson fled to Sweden after converting from Islam to Christianity. But as CBN News reported, she faced imprisonment and death when Sweden rejected her appeal for asylum and threatened to deport her. She became a Christian after having a dream about Jesus. She told CBN News her first choice is to stay in Sweden if possible. Her Swedish attorney is still attempting to appeal her case. And Pat, some observers are saying that this is a violation of human rights and the Geneva Convention.
Absolutely. I mean, the right of a person seeking asylum from clear oppression and certain death is something that I can't imagine Sweden doing what they're doing. The whole thing is incomprehensible given their history in World War II of being a haven from refugees from Nazi Germany. But anyhow, congratulations to Hungary to say, we will take her. I'm sure other countries would give her sanctuary as well. But the one thing the Swedes had better not do is try to hold her and force her to go back to Iran. They ought to say, okay, we can't keep you here, but, you know, there's a visa over there for you in Hungary. Go ahead.